Let me ask you about the book, because I know it is based in part on your experience and on folks you knew. So two questions about that. One, what additional research did you still need to do to complete this book? And two, how do you balance the need to respect what happened and who the people that you're basing this on were versus your need as a storyteller to take the story in new places and serve your thematic concerns?
Those are great questions, and I'm a little scared that they're each so important that I'm scared that I'm going to forget them. So first of all, one of the things I think is so important is research. So even if you think you know a story, I think you need to do research, because let's say a certain person, an author, has two siblings, and let's say they all grew up at the same time with the same parents in the same house. And there may have been incidents that they all experienced together, and yet each of them has a unique take on that incident, and they probably will remember it with slight differences. And it goes back to something we were talking about earlier, that each of us is different. And so there might be so much that's similar, but there is always that difference. And so I think even if you were writing your own memoir, you're not the same person you used to be. So you need to do some level of research to go back and to understand maybe that other time or the other place in your own mind, to connect with it emotionally, but also just physically to do research to see what was going on at that time. Perhaps what you remembered may not have been quite so accurate. Check what was actually available, what was there in terms of setting and so on. And I have seen sometimes, for instance, South Asian writers write about South Asia and get it wrong because they don't know enough. So I was back in India. I go back every year pretty much. I try to do that. And so I certainly did research when I was there. I spoke to people who had worked with children. I spoke to children. I went to places. I don't want to say too much to give away anything, but I went to places like the places that the kids are in the Bridge Home. And I think all of that informed me. One of the other things that I really looked at, and that was very, very important, were notebooks that I had written when I was a child. So when I was a child, I loved books and I loved writing, and I always thought I would be an author and I would write. So I wrote notes. Some of the children that my mother worked with, that I spoke about, would come to our house because I think they felt it was safe. And sometimes they would come and talk to her. You know, they were staying at a residential school, many of them, but they would come over and they would speak to her and to me, and stay overnight at our place, and they would tell stories of what they had been through. And one of those young people had actually lived in a graveyard. And when I think about that, she'd run because she was running away from men who wanted to enslave her. And when I think about what she did, that's astonishing to me. I mean, the level of bravery that you would have to be able to do something like that, and also the depravity of the adults who would force a child into any such situation. You know, it's just so shoddy, so shocking. Anyways, so there was that made a tremendous impact on me. And she said, she would call me her akka, my older sister, and she said, will you write my story one day? And I said, I will. And so in some ways, this is a promise that needed to be kept. And there's so much else. The other people in the book are based on people that I knew as well. So on the one hand, I think there's a great deal of respect you need to give somebody like that says, would you write about me? That, on the other hand, if it's not nonfiction, if it's fiction, there is the responsibility you have to the story as well. And I think of it more as the responsibility I have to the characters who are in my head to tell that story well. And at some stage, I definitely need to think about the reader as well. I don't think about the reader when I write. I think about the reader when I edit. So that's important to me too, because I think you have to be able to spill out, and you have to be able to, whatever comes into your mouth, to channel every word that comes in and get it out there on the page. But then you can chop it and redo it as you need to. chop and redo. You know, I often speak about puking or vomiting words on the page and then cleaning up with bleach. And I think that
that's a pretty good metaphor.
Yeah, and that's how I think about it. And so at that stage, when it comes time to do the bleach clean, to do the edit, you do think about other things. But I think it's important to be as true to the story as you possibly can. And there were certain things I wondered about, whether I should change or whether I should not change, and I just felt I couldn't. And I can't explain to you why, but deep inside me, I felt it would be wrong to change certain aspects of the story as it was told to me.
Do you encounter that with your previous books, where even if it's not based on a person that you've actually known, but the character wants to behave a certain way, do you still feel that call of responsibility of, even if this might work better, this is the story the character wants?
Not quite as much with the others, no. I don't. Well, with Island's End to a large degree, because I think there was a tussle at one point. I wondered whether, well, I think I did and my editor did as well, whether there needed to be two voices. And then I think one voice took over the story, and I realized that it was her story and not anybody else's place to even be there. You know, it was no one else's place as much. And I think if you write multiple points of view, you definitely need it to be equally two other people's stories, or three, or however many viewpoint characters you have. Each of them needs to be central to what they're saying as well. So they need to be really important in that story. So that's something that is important. The other thing that I think is perhaps necessary is that when you write and there is this feeling that the character is taking off and telling you the story, and the character is going on, the character is not going to take over your story. That, you know, at the end of the day, at some point, you're the one who edits, you're the one who decides. So I think it's a fine balance between allowing this character to take over your mind and your heart and your soul, and being able to tell it in a way that feels true and that is true. But there's also, you can't use that as an excuse for meandering into all these other places and losing your way, because at the end of the day, you are steering that craft of your story. You are at the helm of that ship. You know, you are the captain of your ship. You have to get it through, and you can't sort of be bogged down in this storm-tossed ocean in the middle of your book, and nobody knows where you're going, and you don't either. That doesn't work for me. So I think it's a fine balance, and you need to do both. You do need to look and say, yes, I have a responsibility to tell the story as I see it, but I also have a responsibility to tell the story to my readers and to make it readable and to make it polish it.
That makes sense. And that's typically the way it works on this end as well, although I always tell the famous anecdote that originally the alligator people were supposed to be the villains in the first Banneker Bones book. And at about, I don't know, 20, 25 pages in, Banneker comes onto the scene and decided to be a jerk. I hadn't planned for him to be a jerk. He just was. And I said, oh, that is the character. And he took the story in a completely different direction. I've never been sorry that happened, because it made a much better book than the book I had planned. And so I always try to allow at least a little bit for the characters to take over and have their say, so that if this makes any sense without me sounding like a crazy person, it's as much their book as it is mine.
Absolutely. Absolutely. But then again, I think at the end of the day, I do think there is a time that you come in and you take the reins. And yeah.
Oh, sure. No, draft 2, I was cutting out all sorts of meandering sequences.
Yeah.